Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
You have been complaining that I've been talking too much about politics lately and ignoring coronavirus. Now, politics, as far as I'm concerned, is my bread and butter, or more likely roti dal or dahi chawal or dal chawal or thair sadam if you're in the south. So what do we do now? We talk about coronavirus and politics, because politics sits under everything that happens in our lives. And funnily, maybe not so funnily, maybe sadly, in a heavily polarized world, even the virus and how to treat it, what chances do we have or get being killed by it, these are all questions which have got now politicized. So I am talking about how deadly is this virus and how likely is it to kill us, and how impossible or possible it is for us to deal with it. So we now also have a better idea what kind of an animal this virus is. It's not an animal, don't take me literally, it's not even a fully living being. Nevertheless, so one controversial addition to this debate has been an article that's written by a Swiss scientist, a Swiss immunologist. And his name is Beda Stadler, Bedastadler. He is not a quack. He is quite a reputed scientist, albeit controversial, because he is very provocative. He also writes newspaper columns, he appears on TV shows. He uses a very provocative approach. I also like him because he is a supporter of GMO foods, because he believes in science. Now, he's written this article which has been translated from German into English by another scientist on Medium. It's available there. I'm sharing it with you. But before I tell you about this, you have to understand that who Beda Stadler is. He's the former director of the Institute of Immunology in the University of Bern. And he's a biologist and a professor emeritus at that university. Very highly regarded globally. Once again, provocative in the way he speaks, but he's not a quack. He's a first class scientist. Importantly, he's an immunologist, and I will tell you why. Because just as there is politics of left and right, there is also politics of different streams of sciences. So the three streams that you find that feature in the coronavirus debate are: number one, the virologists. They are the ones who are studying the virus, and right now they've been quite honest, because they cannot make exaggerated claims, because everything has to be backed with evidence. Also, they are quite honest to say that we don't know this virus fully yet. The second are epidemiologists. Now, epidemiologists, unfortunately, and I have to say this hand on my heart, have let their science down in the debate over coronavirus, because obviously they did not understand this virus, they did not understand this pandemic, and they've been throwing around mathematical models and trying headline hunting. So one said 1 million will die, 2 million will die, 10 million will die. Somebody said at Imperial College, twice as many Americans would die as died in the Second World War. All that has now proven to be nonsensical. There were people also in India, and I find they still keep giving interviews. Now somebody I saw again giving an interview today saying that today 1.5 crore Indians must be infected. Even if they are infected, it can't be. If that many people are infected, that means fatality rate is really very low. So anyway, I'm not going into mathematical modeling, because that's been discredited entirely, and that's essentially happened. I'm not qualified to question anybody's science, but I am a journalist trained enough to see when somebody is headline hunting. And I noticed early enough that epidemiologists were headline hunting, and they are now discredited. Unfortunately, it's a very important science. Their science is discredited. And even now they are saying, अच्छा ये नहीं होगा तो ये होगा, वो नहीं होगा तो वो होगा. And again, when they have no answer, then as Beda Stadler says in this article, he says then they lean on the second wave कि अभी तो देखा ही नहीं है पिक्चर अभी बाकी है दोस्त now second wave आएगा तब सब लोग मरोगे. So what he's trying to say is, and where I see some value, he says that you've only heard from epidemiologists and virologists, but there is a third set of science involved here and third set of scientists. Those you are not hearing from. Who are they? They are not clinicians, that will come later. They are immunologists, because this disease ultimately it's caused by a virus, but what causes damage to our bodies, what causes damage to our lungs, kidneys, our blood vessels, whatever, our brains, what kills us is our immune system. It's not the virus that goes with a machine gun everywhere, it is the virus that invades us, and it is our body's defensive system that goes after this virus with machine guns. And sometimes when it goes nuts, it gets angry, it's not able to recognize the virus, or when it is outnumbered greatly by the number of ACE2 cells that the virus is inhabited, then it goes berserk and starts firing in all directions, and you get a massacre in the body, massacre of cells, which is called a cytokine storm, and which is what destroys our lungs, kidneys, or wherever we are vulnerable. So our immune system plays a very strong role. That's why it's important that we listen to immunologists. So that argument of Professor Stadler, we cannot argue with. So his article is headlined Coronavirus, why everyone was wrong. I told you he's provocative. Then he also says that the virus is slowly retreating for the past few weeks. He's talking about Switzerland. And he says the experts have missed the basic connection with the virus. And what is the basic connection? He says they've missed, that is the immune response against the virus, and which he says is much stronger than was initially thought. And he said I could slap myself if I looked at COVID-2 virus for too long in panic. Provocative again. Then he says that he's really annoyed that his community of immunologists have let virologists and epidemiologists run away with this debate, because if immunity is what protects you or kills you, then his specialization, his peers should have spoken out, and they have a voice. No argument with that. Then he says it is time to criticize some of the main and completely wrong public statements about this virus. And then he points out, he lists 3 errors that people he thinks have made about the virus. Number 1, he says they were wrong to call it a novel coronavirus. He said when it emerged in China in January, it was called SARS-CoV-2, because it had resemblance with SARS-1. So then we should have thought of it as a version of SARS which had SARS-1 which had mutated. On the other hand, because we said this is a novel virus, instead of focusing on where the virus had, what the virus was about, because virus genome was now available, we focused on the Chinese menu. Which part of the Chinese menu did the virus come from? Because we got obsessed with the novelty aspect of it, that we forgot his view that this virus essentially was SARS-1 virus with modifications, mutations, whatever you call them. So that's one. Second, he says, we also made a big error in believing that we have no immunity to it. And he said there even educated, smart people made a mistake. He said even Anthony Fauci, the famous American infectious diseases doctor, the chief in America who now Trump is fighting with, he said even Anthony Fauci, who I know well and with whom I've been sitting on seminars at National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, in America, even he said this, and because I respect him so much, initially even I thought he must be right. But now you can see, and then he goes on to explain how, you can see that it is completely wrong to presume that we have no immunity against COVID-2 or coronavirus that brings about COVID-2. And third, he says, his language, he says it's crowning stupidity to claim that someone could have corona without any symptoms and pass it along. I promised you that he is provocative. I didn't hide that from you. So he says it's crowning stupidity. And then he goes on to explain how this virus works, etc., etc. But he says that initially I thought that Anthony Fauci couldn't be wrong. But then I saw how the vaccine for coronavirus was being planned. And he says, when I saw the route to the vaccine, I found that this route was very close to the route followed for SARS 1 and other beta coronaviruses. Beta coronaviruses also cause common cold among us. And he said, we face them all the time. He said, the scientists are now trying to see the virus the same way as the human body sees it. Let me try and simplify for you. What does a vaccine do? I am simplifying it. This is not Professor Stadler. When a vaccine goes into a body, the vaccine doesn't go hunting for the virus and kills it. The vaccine prepares your body's immune system to fight the virus. That's why there is no vaccine against HIV yet. Why? Because our immune system has not yet learned to defeat HIV. But our immune system in 98-99% cases anyway defeats the SARS-CoV-2 virus, this coronavirus, because 98-99% people recover on their own because there is no medicine right now to kill the virus. So our immune system knows how to fight and kill the virus. What a vaccine does is to prepare your body to fight the virus, your own immune system, which means your body and your immune system has a way of seeing this virus as a bad guy that must be fought. The virus strengthens it. So he says now scientists are learning to see this virus the way the human body sees it, rather than look at its genetic origins and getting obsessed with it. So he says now, fortunately, we are seeing the virus in terms of how our immune system sees it, or which part of the virus can be used in a vaccine now to alert our immune system and to prepare it to fight it. And he said, look, flu viruses, cold viruses, they mutate all the time. So this could be a mutated virus. I mean, he goes too far. He says this is just another seasonal cold-like virus. That I think is a bit hasty, and in that case, he's also headline hunting. But his other argument that you cannot ignore, that there is immunity also to this virus, is sound. So his language, not mine, although given how irreverential it is, it could be mine too. He says that everybody from WHO to every Facebook virologist, and for heaven's sake, there are Facebook virologists, pharmacologists, epidemiologists, etc., etc., etc. these days, and you have to be careful about them. So he said they all presumed that we had no immunity to this virus because it was novel. And then he says the penny dropped. He said initially I was uncritical, then the penny dropped, because when the first antibody test was put together to detect antibodies among human beings for the virus, and this was put together from old antibody tests for SARS-CoV-1. He said, then I woke up and said, oh, if that test modified can detect antibodies against this virus, then your body must recognize this virus and produce antibodies against it as it produced against SARS-CoV-1. And then he goes on to say that, look, they even found these antibodies from a llama. Llama is an animal. They identified antibodies in the llama which act against SARS-1, SARS-CoV-2, and also against the MERS virus, which means there is a commonality among these viruses, and your body recognizes these viruses and produces antibodies which can attack all of these viruses, including COVID-19. So to say that this was completely novel, he says, was wrong. And he says, look at the example of China. He said the unfortunate thing is everybody went by gut feel. Going by gut feel is not science. And he says, if you look at China, now everybody says Chinese fatalities are so low, Chinese epidemic has come under control so soon. So while there are conspiracy theories and nobody trusts China's numbers, but he also says that China also had a very extensive SARS-1 outbreak earlier. So could it be that the Chinese population, a lot of the Chinese population is already carrying those SARS-1 antibodies, which have given them, or the memory of SARS-1 antibodies, which has given them immunity against this virus. So he's building, his field is immunology, he's building this on his science. Then he quotes a paper from a group of scientists, group of 30 scientists led by Andreas Thiel in Berlin, which says that 34% of the people studied in Berlin who had never been exposed to this coronavirus, 34% of them already had antibodies in their blood against this virus. So he said, so where did those antibodies come? Unless so many of us are already carrying immunity against the virus. So he said, from where has that immunity come? And he says, you forget that the fight against the virus, when a virus comes into our body, it's not as if you don't have antibodies, so the virus will destroy you. Because virus comes in, your body begins to produce antibodies. Then your antibodies fight the virus. That is only the first wave or the first line of defense. Your antibodies kill some viruses. In most cases, they kill all the viruses. So you are asymptomatic, majority are asymptomatic. But in some cases, your antibodies may kill most of the viruses, some get left and you will get fever and mild symptoms for some time. In some cases, maybe because your immune system is compromised, because you are old and with age our immune system gets weaker, or because of our sociological conditions, bad diet, bad immunity, history of infectious diseases, etc., our immune system is weak, then your antibodies leave too many of the viruses alive, who then go and attach themselves to the cells they want to attach to, which is ACE2 cells in our body. When that happens, don't think that your body's battle is lost. Your body has a second line of defense, and that second line of defense is your T cells. T cells are white blood corpuscles, or those white blood cells which fight this disease. So those T cells now get ready, because the first wave of your defenders has been cut down. They then go on to fight, and usually they are able to fight and control the virus. That's the reason most people survive the virus. Otherwise, this virus would have a much higher mortality rate than it does. Then he also refers to another controversial scientist, and we've spoken about him earlier, that is John Ioannidis at Stanford University. Again, he's a renowned scientist, but he's been attacked because it's so polarized by the other side, saying that he's trivializing the threat of COVID-19. So he says that he's not a fool. Einstein Foundation mentions him, lists him among the world's 10 most quoted scientists. And Ioannidis has also said that our innate immunity against this virus is much higher than previously thought. And he said epidemiologists went so wrong because they went with the myth that there was no immunity. Of course, there is the other school that says countries like India have so much immunity that nothing will happen. They've also been proven wrong. But he says epidemiologists made a wrong presumption that there was no immunity. That's why initial worst case models failed. Now they are citing, as I said earlier, a second wave. So he said, I have never seen, this is his quote, I have never seen a scientific branch that maneuvered itself so far on the offside. Now, if you follow football, in hockey, offside is over now. They've stopped they've stopped the offside rule in hockey. But football, there is an offside rule, which is a foul. So he says, I have never seen a scientific branch, that is epidemiology, that maneuvered itself so far on the offside. And then he goes on to say, his quote, why are we so obsessed in the number of deaths than in those who could be saved? This is again an indictment of the epidemiologists. Then he says that why didn't we think that how come there is almost no COVID-19 among children under 10? It can only be because they are more immune. That's his hypothesis. And why is it so that the evidence of this infection increases as we grow older? Because with age our immunity dims. He says also you can see in many of the pensioners' homes, many pensioners die because they get infected and they are not able to control it, but also many pensioners don't die. So it's possible that they have immunity. This, however, is purely hypothetical. So he says, look, strong language he uses. You heard the expression climate change deniers, like in some ways Donald Trump also, who believe there is no climate change, and a lot of the right across the world believes there is no climate change. So like that, he says, I'm using a strong expression, but this is immunity deniers. So he says that this is the graveyard of immunity deniers, intellectual graveyard of immunity deniers. He said people say, and he said that has led to the crowning nonsense or crowning stupidity, as he calls it, of believing that people who are completely asymptomatic could also be carrying the virus and transmit it. So he said, look, if you could be completely asymptomatic and still transmit the virus, then this will cause a big problem for health insurance and teachers going ahead, because then anybody could claim to be sick without symptoms. But because if you establish the principle that you can be sick without symptoms, then how will health insurance decide whether you are sick or not? And similarly, all teachers in the world will be in trouble, because kids will call and say, ma'am or sir, I am sick without any symptoms, but everybody said that coronavirus, I can be sick without symptoms. So he then explains how a viral infection works, or how any infection works. He says there are 5 cardinal principles of an infection. One of those is pain. So if a person says, if a person has the virus in his throat or her throat, then the immune system in the body is fighting that. If the virus is winning, that means the cells will die. The diseased cells will then cause pain or a scratchy throat. So pain is one of the 5 essential principles of an infection. So he said if somebody said I had no pain at all, right, then the person obviously was not infected enough to pass on the virus. And if somebody had a scratchy throat and forgot all about it earlier and is now tested positive, that means the person is not infectious, but RT-PCR test is showing him or her infectious. That is not correct. RT-PCR test can show the person to be positive. But remember that RT-PCR test just picks up, it's a dumb test that picks up RNA particles from your body. Whether they are from a dead virus or a live virus makes no difference to RT-PCR test. So all this RT-PCR test is telling you is that probably this person had the virus, because then doctors also tell you now around the world, including epidemiologists, that after about 5 days of having it, you can't be shedding it to infect others. That also he says you should have watched when people said it takes you 14 days to incubate. All he says were signs that we were making a big mistake. So once again, he explains the process of your immune fight back, your body's immune fight back. One, that your body's antibodies prevent the virus from binding with the cells that the virus is seeking, that is ACE2 cells. Number 2, he says even if it works partially and not all are blocked, some viruses will go to ACE2 inhibitors, at which point you will have no symptoms, because your body's T cells are fighting it. So if your body's T cells are able to deal with it, you will have no symptoms and you will not be infectious. So he said number 3, no symptoms, no disease, because the second line of defense in your body has dealt with the virus. And he said if you want to know more about it, remember how in Korea 200 people who had coronavirus, they were shown they had tested positive again, and there was a scare all over the world that you can get it back again. He said even those people who did that have not apologized. He said later it was confirmed that that was dead RNA particles being picked up by the RT-PCR test, which is dumb to the idea of whether it's a full virus or these are just RNA particles or remnants of a dead virus. So he says that thank God at least WHO has not bought into this idea of asymptomatic infection. In fact, that is the criticism that WHO has been getting for some time. So it is good to know that somebody is also speaking for WHO at this point. So he said that everything that we know now tells us that our base immunity against this virus lasts much longer and it has been there for a long time. Also that it has a long incubation time, but it also gives you a quick immunity. He said antibody titers, which are checking our immune systems, they are telling us that older people are struggling more because they have poorer immune systems. And once again, he says that any country, the damage that the virus is doing there is also a function of the sociology of that country, because if it's a very poor country, you will find people at younger ages also suffering. I think that's probably true in India, because more than 45% people dying in India are below the age of 60. That's the reason we keep on saying the lesson to draw from this is that what is 65 years in the Western world should be 50 years in the Indian world. Anybody over 50 is quite exposed to the dangers of this. And finally, don't reject any research or any ideas based on some science just because they don't agree with your politics. Because you can politicize a virus, you can politicize a disease, but the virus is not political. The virus is arrogant. This virus knows that anybody who has an ego, I will go teach him a lesson. You want to see examples? Boris Johnson, Bolsonaro, Donald Trump. These were the people who said the virus doesn't mean anything, and they've been hit by the virus, either directly, personally, or their countries have been hit big time. So once again, this virus will not even tolerate the arrogance of scientists, particularly arrogance of scientists of any one stream, because this is a complicated issue that needs nuances and which needs all streams of science speaking out. In this case, we have leaned heavily today on immunologists speaking out.